So you want to understand how artifacts work? No problem, let's start from the top. Artifacts in Genshin Impact are one of the very important ways to build your character. They are the main way to boost your stats through buffs and bonuses. Before talking about these buffs and bonuses, let's talk about the 5 different types of artifact that you can put on your character and what their main stats are. Flower. The main stat for this artifact will always be HP. Feather. The main stat for this artifact will always be attack. Sands. You will get a range of main stats here. You will get attack percent, HP, energy recharge, elemental mastery, and defense percent. Goblets. You'll also get a range of main stats here. The only difference between goblets and sands though, is that goblets are the only artifact type that will give you an elemental damage bonus stats, which is very important for your main damage dealing characters. Circulars. Once again, you'll also get a huge range of main stats here. However, circulars are the only artifact type that will give you crit rate and crit damage main stats, which will help your damage dealing characters deal bigger damage numbers. Before talking about what substats you should be looking for in these artifacts, let's talk about what these different types of stats actually do. So what does each stat do? Let's quickly go over it. Attack percent. It boosts the overall amount of attack that your character can put out. Defense. It boosts the amount of defense your character has. HP percent. This increases the amount of health you have. Energy recharge. This decreases the amount of time you have to wait for a character's burst to become available to use. Elemental mastery. This increases the damage outputs from elemental reactions. Elemental damage bonuses. This increases the amount of damage your character can put out when they use their elements. Crit damage. This increases the amount of damage you can put out when you land a critical hit. Or, as I like to call it, big boy number. Crit rates. The more crit rate you have, the more often you'll be able to land a big critical hit, or a big boy number. For example, if your crit rate is at 50%, your character will land critical hits around half the time. So we've covered what artifacts are. How do you know what a good artifact looks like? Well, generally it will look a little something like this. This one? So generally, crit damage, crit rate, attack percent, and energy recharge are the stats you should be looking for if you're planning on getting a good artifact. But there are a few exceptions, such as characters that scale off of certain stats, or if you want characters to deal damage from elemental reactions. Let me explain. Let's look at a typical build where a character doesn't really scale off of anything. So for this section we're going to look at Ningguang, because Ningguang doesn't really scale off of anything, so she's the perfect example of what a normal-ish build looks like. So at the minute I'm using a crit rate weapon, and that's what my artifact build is centered around. In terms of the sets I'm using 2-piece Gladiator's Finale for that extra attack bonus, and Archaic Petra for the added Geo bonus. So for my flower and feather, I'm mainly looking at the substats here, since the main stat doesn't really matter because it doesn't really change. For my sands, I've given her an attack sands, and obviously I've got some crit damage in there as well, which helps. For the goblet, I'm using a Geo damage goblet, and again, I've got a crit damage substat in there too, which is great. And finally, I've got a crit damage circular since I already have a crit rate weapon. So for characters that don't really scale off of anything, this is pretty much the standard quote-unquote build that you should be going for. Now let's take a look at a character whose damage does scale off of a certain stat. Hu Tao is the perfect case of somebody who does scale off of a certain stat. Her damage scales off of HP, which is quite interesting. So let's take a look. So again, starting with her weapon, she has a crit rate weapon, so similar to Ningguang, and that's what my artifacts are centered around. Again, for the flower and for the feather, I'm not looking at the main stats, I'm looking more at the substats, because again, the main stats do not really matter at all. However, I've given Hu Tao a HP sans, because that is what her damage scales off of. If you remember, we did have an attack sans for Ningguang, because she doesn't really scale off of anything, but for Hu Tao, a HP sans is very much needed. Again, for the goblets, I've given her a pyro damage goblet, and then for the circular, I've given her a crit damage circulet, because we have a crit rate weapon already. If you know anything about Genshin Impact elemental reactions, you'll know that the best reactions in the game currently, damage-wise, are Melt and Vaporize. This is because they can double the amount of damage a character can deal. So if you wanted a specific character to deal damage solely based off of Melt or Vaporize, then you'd want to give them as much elemental mastery as possible. Finally, let me give you some short final tips. Don't worry about artifacts until you are AR 45+. This is because this is when you can start to get 5-star artifacts, which is around the time when artifacts and builds really start to matter. If you're not at the stage yet where you're getting 5-star artifacts from domains, save your resin until you can start to get 5-star artifacts. Don't be too picky. It's good to be picky, but remember that the perfect artifact is very difficult to obtain, because it's all RNG based. My rule is that if an artifact has at least one crit substat on it, it has the potential to be good. If you want an example of a horrible artifact, this is it. Oh, come on. Always keep artifacts where the main stats are elemental damage related, elemental mastery, or energy recharge, no matter what the substats are. Those are quite rare. Characters like Bennett, where they can give an attack buff based on their base attack, artifacts do not matter here. If you want Bennett's burst to buff your team's attack, you need a weapon with a high base attack. Artifacts do not affect this, so don't give Bennett attack percent artifacts in this case. Anyway, those are the basics of artifacts. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.
Hey there. If you like Genshin Impact, Animal Crossing or games in general, join our chill Discord server. Thanks and have a nice day.